whose family is saying in a direct appeal, so that's the third family mirroring what the other two families are doing. The direct appeal says, quotes, "All we are hoping for is you to come home safe." Joining us live from Birmingham here in the UK is Zubeida Limbada. She is the director of the think tank Connect Justice. That's a group which offers independent expertise in counter-terrorism. Zubeida Limbada, these are young girls or young women, depending upon the language, the names, terms that one wants to use. What do they think they are doing?
It's such a harrowing story, and I feel it's such a tragic story what's happening in terms of what they feel that they're going to get once they join this jihad of being part of a movement. So they often tend to go in terms of romance, in terms of adventure, and also spreading the message of the Islamic movement itself, the Islamic State, and being part of this political movement.
They're educated, they're bright, they're relatively prosperous, they come from good backgrounds, and yet they seem to live inside this insulated bubble where we're told they're radicalized by social media or on social media, but surely they also see the reality of Islamic State on social media as well. They see it on the news, they hear it on the radio every day, and yet they have a completely different interpretation of this magnetic thing that's pulling them in.
I'm very sure that they're very aware of what they're letting themselves in for. So the three girls that you've just mentioned, the fact that they've left in half-term, the fact that they had a credible story that they gave to their parents on their journey to Turkey and probably then ending up in Syria, they've taken very educated kind of guesses in terms of what they need to do, and there's clearly someone, what tends to happen online, who will guide them through this process. I've just recently returned from a Countering Violent Extremism Summit in Washington, and there was an academic called Peter Neumann from King's College in London who talked about a difficult European problem, which is that European governments don't really want to acknowledge the fact that some of these citizens don't feel that they belong, and this concept of identity and belonging for Muslim communities in the European countries that they reside in. And I think there's an element that needs to be addressed through an educational process rather than just legislating ourselves out of this situation itself, because clearly the deterrence in terms of the high sentencing that we're providing under the Terrorism Act is not making these young people stop and think that they will be in that situation. Some of these young people will not feel that they will need to come back to this country again. So that messaging doesn't really affect them. And I think that education kind of going out and reaching out to parents as well as young people, there's not enough of that happening within this country as well.
I guess that's the key thing. You've just nailed it for us. This idea of the outreach programs, we've heard a lot about that over the past, 3-4 years perhaps. Is it that those outreach programs are not working, or is it that the schools aren't talking to the mosques and they're not talking to the parents, and they're not kind of communicating in the way that these kids communicate with each other?
I think it's quite often you need a mixture of responses. So authorities will need to do what they need to do, educational outreach will need to happen, but I think the key thing is around credible grassroots organisations needing to be part of this, and there's not enough of this happening as well. So one of the things that we do within our organisation at Connect Justice, we provide a safe space, so we invite young people over, we invite young women over, and then we also invite people from authority into these very small kind of gatherings as such. And the forum to kind of ask any kind of aspects around foreign policy, drone policy, anything that's happening, young people are allowed to ask those questions, because at the moment, when the educational kind of outreach happens, it's very much top down, and young people have an element of frustration when they may not feel that they belong, or they feel there's a sense of injustice. And sometimes these spaces need to be the provision that has to happen in order to feel that they can articulate what they are feeling and sensing, as well as reading online as well, because that's the part of the propaganda of the Islamic State as well.
Ms. Limbada, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Well, Islam is one of the fastest growing religions in the United States, with 3/4 of its 1,200 mosques being built in